All right, hello, and welcome to tonight's author discussion with Dr. Michael Cohen, the author of the book Modern Political Campaigns: How Professionalism, Technology, and Speed Have Revolutionized Elections. This is a program presented by Loudoun County Public Libraries. My name is Jeremy, and I'm a library assistant in the program department of LCPL and your host tonight. If you have any questions or comments, please use the chat feature at the bottom, and I will pass them along at the conclusion of our program. We're lucky to have author and PhD holder Michael Cohen here tonight. Dr. Cohen is the CEO of Cohen Research Group, a leading political, public affairs, and corporate research firm. He publishes the pioneering and award-winning Congress in Your Pocket suite of mobile apps and teaches graduate-level courses at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Cohen has been interviewed about campaigns, elections, and political research by numerous news networks and publications. He's a three-time graduate of the University of Florida. He's a native of Long Island, New York, but luckily he lives here in Ashburn. He's lived here for about 25 years with his wife and 2 kids. For such a topical subject in the news, we're lucky to have someone of his expertise here tonight to speak to us. Thanks for being here, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So go ahead and pass the thing so you should be able to share your screen.
Sure. Let me put you over here in the corner, Jeremy.
That works.
See if I can do that. So everyone, welcome to the program tonight. I really appreciate you coming. It's neat to be able to do this with the library. When you write a book, one of the big kicks out of writing a book is saying to yourself, wow, maybe one day it'll be in my home library. And you end up in a situation where all of a sudden you find out that it's in the library, and then it was just an incredible opportunity to come here and just talk to you about the book and be here to answer a lot of questions that you might have later on. And I will also give you contact information, so if you have any other questions, you can always just reach out to me afterwards. So let's begin the program. So I'll give you an overview on how campaigns connect citizens to their government and how that's changed over the past 25 years. We'll talk about the components of the book in terms of professionalism, technology, and speed, and how basically campaigns have changed over the past 25 years. Let's go ahead and say, also, by the way, thanks so much LCPL for listing it. If you wanted to go ahead and get the book, you can just go ahead and type in Modern Political Campaigns, and I think you can get it electronically, and I know you can get it physically. And again, that's just such a big kick for me to see that. That's not me. That's me. Yeah, there we are. Yes, I'm not the other guy. So if you thought that I was the other guy, I apologize. I promise to be as entertaining as possible. I may not have an ankle bracelet on me, but I think it'll be still a fun program. I've been on the Chuck Todd's podcast, the POTUS, Sirius XM radio, as well as different podcasts and stuff like that later for the book. I did a thing for Campaigns and Elections magazine. It's been really a lot of fun to do this. And so for all of you who are thinking about writing a book, I encourage you to do it, because in some cases it's actually a lot more fun and a lot more work than you would ever think, but the payoff is just so much fun. It's so neat to be able to hold the book in your hand and be like, oh my God, I wrote this thing. So thanks again for coming. So let me give you an overview on government and how this all came together. So the founders really designed a republic, not a democracy. So one of the things that you probably learned somewhere along the way in civics or social studies is that we're a republic and not a democracy. So we vote for the people who actually do the things in government. And this was sort of a reaction to what the founders saw in the French Revolution. The founders favored stability over separation of powers, over democratic energy. And James Madison, said it best: the accumulation of powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, basically is a terrible thing and leads to tyranny. Now, in our country, of course, not everyone had a chance to vote right away. And, now finally, 100% of citizens 18 years of age or older can vote. And again, this is basically something that happened in my lifetime. Political parties, they were wary of those too. And, our two-party system wasn't developed intentionally. It developed out of sort of a disagreement between founders and you ended up with separation of powers that helped mitigate the effects. They kind of saw what was coming, and they designed the Constitution to sort of take care of what probably was going to occur. But the fact of the matter is that they didn't say, well, okay, because we know there'll be two parties, this is how we're going to design the Constitution. So it's one of the things to think about when you think about modern campaigns is how this came together. So 85% of the adults in the groups that at the end of the political spectrum, right around here, this is a Pew Research Center study that just came out last year, voted, and versus 67% overall. So what that really comes down to is this, is that the people who are at the extremes are much more likely to vote. It's kind of like when you're a super fan of a sport, you're much more likely to go to a game. This is the same situation where if you're, a super ideological person, more than likely you are actually going out to vote. You're voting more often than folks who, frankly, are just, enjoying their lives. They didn't envision the media explosion that we have seen over the past 25 to 30 years. 1965, the Voting Rights Act is passed. That's only 5 years before I was born. And, now we're looking at things like the first iPhone being released in 2007. We released Congress in Your Pocket actually that year. But 312 million people right now are carrying around smartphones, which I have in airplane mode. And it's a very different environment for media. You no longer have to get your media through TV. You can get it on your phone. You no longer have to watch commercials. You can scan through them. So all of this is just completely changed how we run campaigns now. And the ownership of other devices, now 77% of people now have, some version of a desktop or a laptop. And again, when I was growing up, my first computer was an Apple II Plus. It was one of those clunky things that you'll see on the interwebs. You had a green screen and all that, and you couldn't do very much with it. The first program I ever wrote was a program so that helped me study Spanish, and now you can just get an app that's a million times better. But anyway, the point is that with all of these devices in hand, you now have a much more powerful media environment that can be much more targeted to people individually. But the founders, they definitely knew how to media drop. So when they had Oppo, they knew how to drop it. And so Alexander Hamilton would write out of the New York Evening Post, and Jefferson and Madison would write out of the National Gazette. Now, of course, they wrote under pseudonyms, but everybody knew who was writing what. This wasn't an anonymous situation. Everyone knew which papers were being written by who, and they knew their audiences. And so we're now in a situation where our audiences are now watching different pieces. So if you're a liberal, you're watching MSNBC. If you're conservative, you're watching Fox News. And if you're QAnon, you're watching, I guess, OANN. But everyone has their own media now. Every time the country has tried to limit fundraising, it has essentially gone the wrong way. And so when the first federal campaign finance law was passed in 1897, it was basically just to go ahead and limit soliciting money from a specific group of people, and this was naval yard workers for federal campaigns. Since then, Citizens United, McCutcheon, all kinds of other, supporting legislation and supporting, court cases, they've essentially gone ahead and blown up the system. So if you wanted to give money to a campaign, in large part, there's a way to give money without it even being counted and without even being able to see it at this point. And as you can see over here, the records in spending are just enormous. Literally in 2016, we were looking, let me go back for a second. In 2016, we were looking at, just over $6 billion. And in 2020, over $14 billion was spent. It's incredible. And presidential polling, which is sort of my background, has always been a work in progress. So I used to work for the Gallup poll. That's where I started off my professional career after I worked on campaigns in Florida. And, Gallup kind of blew the 36 race because all he did was survey people who were reading Literary Digest, which was sort of like The Economist now, a very upscale, very well-informed, literary kind of magazine. And so those people were definitely voting for Roosevelt's opponent. But in fact, Roosevelt won. And so, of course, we all know about Dewey beats Truman. And the big problem there was that the last poll that was predicting the election was 2 weeks before the election. And anyone who knows about politics, even back then, would have said, my God, that's really crazy. But the polling stopped 2 weeks before the election. They thought it was basically going to be over. But it wasn't, of course, and Dewey did defeat Truman. And so what you're seeing right now is this, 2.7% was the difference between the Real Clear Politics polling average, which was this, showing basically a 7.2% spread between Trump and Biden. And then the final Biden result, what Trump-Biden result was 4.5%. So that's only a 2%, basically a 3% margin of error. Now, for most polls, a 3% margin of error is actually pretty good. So it was within the margin of error, it picked the right candidate who was going to win, but just not the spread. So in the area of field operations, Lincoln did a rally. Let me go back for a second. I'm sorry. Lincoln did a rally in 1860, not, somewhere out in the open. It was basically at his own home. And so for the vast majority of campaigning in American life, most presidents, most candidates did not want to seem like that they had too much ambition, even though, of course, they were all very ambitious. And so campaigns really changed, over the past 25, 30 years, and even a little bit before then, in that now there's much more sophisticated data than you could ever imagine. When I was first starting 25, 30 years ago, we had sheets of paper so that we'd go knock on doors. Now you have iPads or iPhones, and you can take surveys while you're there or collect data while you're there on people who are going out to vote, or people who may not want to vote, or people who may actually be against your candidate. So 1.4 million people attended the rallies in 2016. And Brad Parscale ended up being his campaign manager in 2020, received over $88 million in 2016. And some of it went to post-rally list development. And that's actually where a lot of campaigns are going. Social media and all of those kinds of things are great, but they're actually tamping down your ability to be able to use their best tools to go ahead and target voters, basically because of the hacks in 2016 and all the things that happened after that. So what you can do now is, if you have lists of your people, you can then upload them to these platforms, and then you can get lookalike audiences so that you can then contact those folks or advertise to them. And so there's a huge market right now for not just going ahead and knocking on doors or sending mail or bringing people to rallies, but to basically putting together lists for your own campaign, because then the better the list you have, the better the list of people that you could then market to. And so here's the book. Let's talk a little bit about professionalism. So with all the new tools, voters have become activists themselves. Our expectations of precision are really out of whack. We need to understand that with polling, you're not going to be perfect. And so the polls are not lying. The polls are not wrong. They operate within a margin of error. And then the more you do that and the more you understand that, the better. And so, for example, if you look at this one over here, it says Trump +3, but the rest were Clinton. Trump +3 wasn't right because the popular vote went to Clinton. This would be an outlier. So if you're looking at places like Real Clear Politics and you're looking for polls that are saying anything on the national level, so you might be looking at Biden's approval rating. Like there was an approval rating that came out a couple of weeks ago from, I think it was Quinnipiac, and it was way, way off, but it was huge. And so it got a lot of news. You need to look at them in terms of what is the range of the polling that's happening during that time period to give you a better sense of really what's going on. Now, political job listings are actually kind of helpful-ish. Like if you actually want to do this for a living, the best way, frankly, to do it, and this came through all through the book, no matter who I talked to, whether it was Tony Fabrizio or whether on the right or whether it was Cylinder Lake on the left or anyone, they would all tell you, look, the best way to get a job in politics is basically just to call a campaign and volunteer. And the reason why you do that is because after a while, campaigns kind of figure out who the good people are, and then they hire them full time. And that really gives you a sense of really how a campaign works. And as you're working through it, the best advice that I could give people who are working on campaigns is not to just do your one little thing, but to ask questions of all of the people you're interested in. So if you're interested in digital, go and take the digital director out to lunch. If you're interested in polling, make a phone call and set up some time to Skype or Zoom or meet them in person when they come in and give their presentations. It's really a great way to do that. The other thing I would say too is that it really helps to get an introduction to someone who works there, because these impersonal job lines right here, this is where everyone feels they have to advertise, but the best jobs in politics really are offline. Let's go to the next one. So paid and earned media, this ecosystem that's been built over the past 25 years. Politico just celebrated I think its 15th anniversary. The AAPC was not even around when I was in college. Campaigns and Elections magazine was the only thing that we were able to read that was actually campaignish and interesting. And then now we have things like Startup Caucus's Business and Politics show that actually walk you through like how politics really works. And now there are some great programs. I mean, the Graduate School of Political Management where I taught, the IOP over there, which is a fantastic program. And then locally you have Georgetown and American, which also have programs. We actually at Hopkins have a great political communications program that I can recommend. And, the one thing I would say too is that in between campaigns, people used to sort of like cycle off firms and stuff like that because they didn't have the money really to pay people. But now healthcare issue advocacy advertising in 2019 was $65.3 million. That's all going to people who are actually working in politics. And a lot of it is going to these firms who stick around after elections, like mine. Opposition research has become an every year profession, extending into the corporate and public affairs realms. And so sometimes corporations are in arguments with each other. And so you'll see, Oppo being thrown back and forth on them. You'll also see public affairs issues like we were talking about before. In healthcare, you'll see it on transportation. You saw it with Build Back Better, for example. A lot of money spent by the Chamber of Commerce, or a lot of money spent by other organizations, pro and con. And so, for Oppo, corporate reputation has become a must-have. And 63% of the value of your business is reputation, and opposition research is one way to help manage it. And so a lot of the stuff that we learned through campaigns is actually getting refined and modified for the corporate world and also for public affairs. So a little bit about tech. So this is a picture of what my Apple II Plus used to look like. And that's my current iPhone. And so this had 64 kilobytes on my first Apple II Plus home computer. Now we have Quizlet instead of the flashcard thing that I was writing. And now that's the number of bits that you have on my iPhone. And it's amazing how much you can do with them now. The founders did not envision, a United States to your pocket, or anything like that. And, when I worked on my first campaign, voter data was not widely available. You had to actually ask the supervisor of elections or the state secretary of state of Florida, and you would get a data file that you would then have to import from a CSV file into a clunky thing. I mean, all this data now is much more refined. There's a lot more information on us, which is in one way creepy because, frankly, I don't want everyone to know everything about me. But also it's sort of comforting because the kind of information that they're really going to want on me really is about my voting patterns. It's about, the kinds of things that I'm interested in. So campaigns, the best kind of advertising, frankly, is the advertising that seems to speak to you. And the more that people know about you, the more that they can reach you in a personal way. And so 235 million Americans are available in Aristotle's national voter file, and 253 million are available in their consumer file. And all of this information now is available today. And over the next 10 years, the way I'm looking at it is that campaigns are going to have to become more personal based on the data that they have on us. There's addressable television, there's audio platforms, social networks, and all those kinds of things, and relational texting. All of this really pulls together all of this data into one place, because having the data is one thing, but actually moving it in a way where you can actually reach voters is actually more interesting, right? In fact, 5 billion texts were reached in October 2020 alone, according to RoboKiller. That's a ton of text. So some of you, I feel bad for your iPhones or your Androids. I mean, they're getting crushed out there. You can, by the way, for most real political ads on your phone, you can basically just say the word stop, and it will actually stop the text chain. They have to let you opt out. And so you're able to get out of it. But the fact of the matter is that if you are this relational texting thing here, friends who are texting you are much more powerful than just somebody from a campaign. So campaigns now have decided that they're trying to find people through other people. And so they put together their phone list, almost like a phone tree, like you would for, your baseball team or soccer team. If something happens with the weather, you call one person and they call two people. This is the same way that people are doing that for what is basically called relational organizing. You'll hear that term a lot now. And it's actually become more of a science now, as opposed to just sort of a term that was aspirational. So precision now rests on the ability to sample populations from enhanced voter files. When I first started in polling, we would take random samples of phone numbers in a certain area code. Well, now that we can all take our phone numbers with us wherever we go, my wife actually has hers from Maryland when we moved to Virginia. I got one in Virginia. I decided to leave Maryland behind. I became a Virginian. But now, because people will keep their phone numbers basically for their entire lives, the important thing is to know where you are and where you're registered to vote. And all those data points now are being used from where we sample individuals to go ahead and do our surveys. So we no longer say, well, we just want phone numbers, in Virginia, because that would leave out a whole lot of other people who have phone numbers from elsewhere, right? So we now have to know where you are and where you're registered to vote. And that's how we do our science a little bit better now. And opposition research is now online. I mean, if you wanted to learn anything you wanted about me, or a lot of things about me and my background, you can just go to my LinkedIn page, or you can go to my Facebook page, or you can look at my Twitter feed, or you can look at other things and sort of put together what might look like, a profile of who I am. And so, all of that information now is available. And so when you do opposition research, the most important thing is not just the data or the thing that you think is the creepiest, but it tells a narrative about who this person is. Only 7% of Americans say they don't use the internet for any purpose. Let's talk a little bit about speed. So the speed at which politics moves now complicates how we can poll. So political engagement is now spiked by easy access to fundraising tools to deliver messages really fast. So 5 days is the number of days that a poll should be in the field. I mean, that's basically our version of what we think is a best practice. But in reality, we have much less time. And towards the end of a campaign, when you're tracking, you're basically doing a rolling average of 2 or 3 days as opposed to 5 days. And the reason why you do 5 days is because you want to capture people who work on the weekends. You want to capture people who work during the day, or during the week, during the day, or at night, or different parts of the day, because there are a lot of people who have very different schedules than just sort of 9 to 5. And digital media advertising now commands about a quarter of presidential campaign budgets, which is incredible. If you think about it, digital media has only been around for maybe a decade or so, and it's now taken up a quarter of campaign budgets. But now, actually, when you're looking at down ballot races, they're spending much more money on this kind of advertising, because number one, it's cheaper. Number two, it's more easily addressable. And if you're looking at just a certain county, or if you're looking at a set of counties, it's more efficient for your budget than actually buying like radio or TV or anything like that. So this is how much money outside groups are spending, and this is how much money political parties are spending. In 2000, it was about 30%, and right now it's about 5% of ads that are aired. So here's one from my background, and it's in the book, and there's a really funny story about it. And basically what it comes down to is that the speed of today's Oppo requires you to be able to counter immediately. And this happened, I guess, a few years ago. We were trying to primary Ted Yoho, who was sort of a proto-Trump guy. And except I think he was a little crazier. Our polling had Jake within 10 before the Oppo drop. Now, this is Jake, and this is him at his church, actually. This is also Jake. This is Jake as a LARPer, and it would be, kind of okay, I guess, maybe in a Democratic primary, but in a Republican primary, and sort of the farmlands of Florida, very conservative, very traditional. This was actually a little too far out for them, and it was really tough. And the problem really with the whole thing was that we were caught flat-footed, because when you work with a candidate, the first thing that you say to your candidate is there something that I should know? And so when I was talking to my friend, who's the general consultant on the campaign, he said, well, there's nothing about this guy that's very, very interesting. He's just sort of a Chamber of Commerce kind of Republican guy. He's married. They have a baby on the way. He's a nerd. He plays video games. I'm like, well, he's not a nerd because everyone plays video games. So, okay, fine. No big deal. But the problem was that, after we took our poll and we found that we had a shot at winning, within a couple of weeks, this dropped on redstate.com. And all of a sudden, this became a problem. And Jake did not win. Jake got destroyed. Jake lost by 79%. In fact, Jake we tried to persuade him to not go on the Colbert Report, but he did anyway. And so, yeah, that happened. So I got a call from my friend who's the general consultant. He said to me, and this is after the whole, thing that went on with the Oppo drop. And he said to me, look, the Colbert Report called us. They said, would you like to be on? And I was like, he goes, I'm either an idiot or I'm a genius. And I'm like, look, if you have to ask the question, you should know the answer. You're an idiot. This is terrible. Whatever you're going to tell me next is terrible. We shouldn't do it. And he described to me that Colbert wanted to have him on the show and sort of have fun with it and the whole thing. And I was like, please don't do this. Please don't do this. Please don't do this. He said, okay, I'll bring it back to Jake. And Jake said, I'll do it. And I'm like, oh, we're doomed, right? And so that's why you end up at 79% when you lose the primary. This is very bad. If you went ahead and Google Jake Rush after this, I won't take up your time with it now, but let's just say this. Colbert shows up in a vampire outfit and wonders why Jake isn't. So needless to say, it did not go well for us. Field operations, in between campaigns now, field operations has become wonderful. I mean, we do field through Congress in Your Pocket. You can go ahead and click on that, and you can email the chief of staff directly, not through something else. There's a Resist bot, which does a very good job as text messaging. They do platform mobilization on phone to action. And then 5Calls is actually an app that I like also. Allows you to call all of your representatives in your area. But Americans now drive policy debates armed with all this technology. And so you don't have to go to a rally. You don't have to go and, take a Capitol Hill day and go down with a bunch of people and go meet with members of Congress. You can do all of this remotely. And one of the best examples was during COVID. The National Restaurant Association, as you would imagine, was really under COVID, and it was awful for them. They were able to send over 500,000 messages during the shutdown through phone to actions advocacy platform. And there are a lot of platforms that do this, so it's not something that, they're the only people who do it, but it really shows you, the power of being able to do this stuff now using technology very quickly and very professionally. And they attracted more than 100,000 new advocates, and they grew their list by 30 times. And as like I said earlier, we're really, politics right now is in the list development business. Barriers to engagement, have been removed as mobilization is instant. My dissertation was about healthcare reform and how important the Harry and Louise ads were, which was sort of the first public affairs campaign. HIA and NFIB spent 20 million on those ads. And, in support of, Build Back Better, they only spend 10 million. So now you know why, in 1993, 94, why HIA got ahead and why Build Back Better didn't make it over the finish line. So here's my contact information. I'd be more than happy to talk to any of you offline. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn at Michael David Cohen, all standard spellings. You can reach me at mcohen@cohenresearchgroup.com, or you can DM me on Twitter at Michael Cohen. As you imagine, I get a lot of interesting mentions and a lot of interesting conversations with people who think I'm the other guy. But I'd be more than happy to take any of your questions and appreciate the opportunity.
So we had one question, Michael. So the size of the central campaign offices, are they a lot smaller now, or are they larger compared to maybe 15, 20 years ago?
I don't think that the central offices themselves are that much bigger.
Right.
But they have a lot more consultants around them. So instead of just having an advertising firm, you now have a digital firm, you have a broadcast firm. Instead of just having pollsters, you might have people who do online polling versus traditional polling. There's been a bifurcation of all kinds of different vendors around campaigns.
Right.
But in many cases, some of the campaigns have actually been able to run better campaigns with fewer paid people and more volunteers, because they're able to go ahead and be much more efficient with their dollars, because they can go ahead and do all these things, electronically, much faster, and, with higher precision.
Yeah, I guess I was just referring to, that makes sense. Just with all these, the phone banks and these text banks where people, you don't really have to, you can get anyone to just go online and to type in emails or phone numbers. I assume that's taken over from not going door to door and knocking on people's doors and,
well, actually, it's actually supplementing. So there's a lot of good academic research actually on the importance of meeting voters in person. So the best way to meet a voter is me to you, except me knocking on your door, right? That's the best thing you can do. Everything else is how close of a relationship do you have with somebody. And so people are still knocking on doors. They're just being more efficient about it. Okay. You're getting fewer people knocking on your doors who you're not interested in at all, because they know your voting patterns. So if you're a strong Democrat, you're not going to have any Republican candidates knock on your doors if you've gone to the last 4 primaries and voted Democrat, right? Okay. If you've gone to the Democratic primary for the past 4 cycles, they've decided that you're probably not worth it. So we're not going to go and knock on your door. We may send you a flyer. We may do different things if we have extra money, but they won't go ahead and do sort of the most invisible things,
Okay. We had another question. What are your opinion on local races like district supervisor?
I think first of all, I think all of these campaigns are important. Okay. So to me, I have a soft spot for some of these campaigns. When I first started out, I worked for the Republican Party of Florida, and we were running state house races. Okay. And so, that's the lowest level statewide race that you could run. Right. And so, on county supervisor or even, school board, more and more of those campaigns are becoming much more professional. They're becoming much better funded, because you can now go ahead and raise money outside of the area. With the politicization of school boards for good and bad, those have become races that have actually become better funded than you would have ever imagined even 5 years ago. And so with that budget, you can then spend a lot more money on Facebook ads that are geo-targeted, that are, for, A/B tested versus, one or another population. So all of these campaigns now have far more resources and far more tools to be successful than ever before. Whereas you would have a supervisor's race, you would literally just go knock on all the doors, because that was the best you could do, because you couldn't afford to do anything other than yard signs. You couldn't afford to do anything more than phone banking. Now you can do, Facebook ads or other targeted ads, at a fraction of the cost that you could have. The cost to entry to this is much, much lower.
We had a question about
by the way, Jeremy. I really do. I actually do. I think I think people running real campaigns for local races is better because you get to know who these people are. Because in most cases, 5, 10, 15, 25 years ago, even now, you don't know who these people are. And that's
Right.
because there's been no marketing around them because they weren't able to raise money or spend it in such a way that you could actually learn who they are. And I think it's important for us to know them.
Okay, definitely. We had a question about best sources for big fundraising.
Best sources for big fundraising. Okay, if you're an R, you use their platform. If you're a D, you use their platform. And so, yeah, these platforms are definitely, there's a set of platforms on the right and there's a set of platforms on the left. And you can basically go ahead and use them, for relatively low cost. And you can then put them on your website and you can use them that way. So, yeah.
All right. We had a question about the increase in from 2016 to 2020. What was the increase? Where did that money go towards? Is there a specific sector that boosted those numbers to the extremes that they did?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it ended up being the explosion of online individual fundraising. And so one of the things the Trump campaign did extraordinarily well in 2016, and also, Clinton was no slouch either, but they were masters at getting people to help raise money for them. So there were text chains, there was a lot of Facebook ads, there was a lot of social media around it. And so a lot of that brought in money off the street that frankly wouldn't normally come. And in addition, for people who would donate $10, they got those people to donate $20 because they were able to go back to them and it wasn't a high cost to go ahead and do that. So that was a really big explosion between those two times.
Okay, cool.
Good question.
Do we have any more questions? Looks like that was the last one. So I'd like to thank you, Michael, for your time. And like he said, if you his book is available. So if you want to go to the Loudoun County Public Library website, you can reserve it. You can also, I'm sure, order it online. And like I said, I've read the introduction, and you'd be surprised how funny it is, and there's really some great stories. And like I said, there's not a more topical subject. Well, actually, we have one more, or another question has popped up. What platforms are good for left, for I guess Democrats? I guess for the fundraising.
God, I'm blanking on the name. I think it's Blue something or other. It's in the book. I know that. I'm sorry. I don't read the book.
Yeah, you have to read the book for.
It's Win Red on the right, and it's Act Blue on the left. That's what it is. Okay. Act Blue is the biggest one on the left, and Win Red is the biggest one on the right. And by the way, Act Blue was out about 10 years ahead of Win Red. And they had a huge, because the Obama team was just fantastic, and they seeded these people, and they did a wonderful job of sort of filling the ecosystem, the electronic ecosystem of fundraising. And so Act Blue became the sort of de facto fundraising arm for the Democrats. But there's a lot of others, to be honest. I mean, a lot of the big groups that I talk about in the book, they actually have, a lot of the platforms now do fundraising, but they also do, canvassing. They also do, fundraising. I mean, all of this kind of stuff together is becoming it starts off where you have a little bit of a tool, and then it becomes part of the platform. It's kind of like a lot of the things that you're seeing in technology wise, right? Like Instagram started off as its own app. It got bought out by Facebook. And so a lot of the big quote unquote Facebooks of politics have fundraising arms. So even though Win Red and Act Blue are the main ones that you'll see, there are a lot of other platforms that basically do this very well and in a more integrated way to how you would run your campaign.
Okay,
good question. I'm sorry, I didn't get in my brain because I don't know. It's like you write the thing and it's like, oh yeah, it's probably on page 86. We're looking back. I mean, it's there somewhere. I don't know. But yeah, fair point. And but again, a lot of options on both sides. But Act Blue is on the left.
Okay, cool, awesome. Well, thank you for everyone for taking part in this, and thank you, Michael. We appreciate it, and we may have another one of these in the upcoming months. So keep looking on the library website, programming website, and we'll update it. So thank you once again, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Stay warm. Have a good night, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.